It's a very good question. It's a long scenario, but I'm going to provide a summation. I mean, obviously you can read it. And I did redact some of the specific information with regards to names of the clinic and names of the school for obvious reasons. But anyway, at age 3, you had your child evaluated multiple facilities, and they recommended that you rightly go down to the Board of Education to get him evaluated for special education services. They only saw him to school for, let's say, 15 minutes, you say, and they evaluated and his scores were such that they said he didn't qualify. Well, you continued to receive services, so he didn't get any special education services for his 3-year-old year. But then you took him back to additional clinics and was receiving therapy, and they once again recommended, hey, and during this time, you got a solid diagnosis of autism spectrum, along with deficits in OT, speech language. He was receiving services in those areas. And they directed you, rightly so, to go back to the Board of Education to get him evaluated again. It appears he didn't specify that, but I'm assuming that he qualified this time. And what they ended up saying is that, well, you know, he's going to be in a regular preschool class instead of an inclusion class. And I guess what you're wondering in the question, I didn't really see a question, but I think it's very pertinent to have this discussion because I think you're a little baffled as to how screwed up this process is with regards to trying to identify your child for public education services and not have you running the roads everywhere, taking him to various therapeutic services and getting him evaluated if you're paying taxes and there are definite laws out there to protect him and to provide these services through special education and through the public school, which is their requirement. He is entitled to a free appropriate public education, starting at age 3 to 5, and that preschool, those preschool years, guys, the standard of the school system, the mandate for them to provide a free appropriate public education is no different than if your child was kindergarten all the way to graduation. It's the same law, the same standard. It is not different on any level. Okay? Now the problem is in Alabama, and that's where you are in Alabama, and yes, you had 5 different facilities evaluate him, all come with a consistent recommendation. It was a school that had a different perspective at 3 years old. The nice thing is that you have your statute of limitations. So you have 2 years to sit there and challenge the decisions that they made. Because if your child was entitled to these services and they did not do a good job, and they did not do a thorough job as the law dictates during that 3-year-old evaluation, then you can challenge that. And then because he's eligible now, well, when did they know? When did they suspect? When should they have known that your child should have been thoroughly evaluated and been provided an IEP? And if that was at 3 years old, then you would be entitled to remedial or compensatory services that might include reimbursement for some of your out-of-pocket costs from having to go and get those things yourself during the time period that the school was responsible legally to providing your child a free appropriate public education because they went through the motions. And some of this stuff is very intentional with some of these schools, guys, to where they're like these screwed up gatekeepers, and they decide who gets in to receive special education services, not understanding that 3 to 5 year window is such a critical developmental window for many of our kids with developmental disabilities, that losing that time actually costs school systems way more money in the form of resources and need because they did not do the heavy work of funding and addressing these issues in the preschool years. Now, why is that? Because in Alabama, the legislature had a brainiac idea, along with the Department of Education, to create the first-class preschools. And, they're open to all students, and that's including special education identified students. But it works on a lottery system, okay? Which means that it's not discriminatory because everybody has an opportunity to be selected. And what that ended up doing, because the state funds the first class preschools, and that means the individual schools don't have to dig in their own pockets to come up with the money to pay for their own preschool programs, which they all used to have in order to serve their special education population, which meant that they would open it up for community kids that did not have disabilities so that they could create inclusion classes that were around a 50-50 mix of neurotypically developing students with kids with IEPs. That used to be the model, and the schools themselves would have to fund that. They wouldn't get it from the state. Well, with the invention of this first class preschool that, well, we're going to serve all kids. We'll let you in. It's a lottery system, therefore it's not discriminatory. And the state is providing the money, then of course, Eureka, all of these boards of education goes, we don't have to spend the money creating our own preschools that serve these the special education kids, which, a lot of these administrators view as a waste of money. So let the state waste the money through the first class preschool. And then if these kids don't get lotteried, well, what are they going to do with them? And that's where too many parents in these preschool years do not know their rights, do not know this process. They're not familiar with it yet. Usually you get familiar with it fifth, like 5 years old, 6 years old. You're ahead of the curve because you're asking the question now, and I'm letting you know that you got hoodwinked, okay? You got hoodwinked. Very valid questions. You are not wrong, okay? You found out now. Good. Do something about it. Or they'll try to fool you again. Okay. So, and look, and it doesn't matter. You close your eyes, put yourself in a different school, and 9 times out of 10, they do the same thing because of how the current preschool structure exists in Alabama. Okay. And that's through the state funded first class preschools. They feel like they don't have to create their own. That's wrong. And so what they end up doing is, well, we got to keep our numbers low. So they end up not qualifying kids, and they end up saying, well, they can go get services privately. And then they run they sort of, gamble the schools on how many parents are going to challenge them legally on what they've done or what they haven't done. All right. And sometimes, and most of the time, they believe that that's cheaper than actually serving everybody as they need to be served, because only a small percentage of parents are going to figure out what their rights are and figure it out that they have been hoodwinked and do something about it. Everybody else, like I said, they don't figure it out until later. And then, if you're outside of that 2-year statute of limitations window, can't do anything about it anyway. Okay, so I'd like to know whether or not your child is part of that first class lottery system, or whether this is a different approach, and whether your child did in fact qualify for an IEP, or whether he still doesn't have one. Now, when I notify you that I approved your message, I'm also going to, ask you some additional questions. So just in my mind, and maybe I can provide some additional recommendations to you. And if necessary, I don't have a problem helping you get this thing corrected and ironed out. It's not that difficult. These schools are wrong. And what your child requires per the science is exactly what's been recommended by your private clinicians. Your child does need a full-time preschool program with an assortment and different approaches with regards to curriculum and methodology that we know works. Your child needs to be exposed to neurotypical children for the modeling, and also be reinforced and taught what school expectation are during the school year leading up to the kindergarten year, and to put him in the best position possible to continue to be mainstreamed, and stay in a general education setting with supports, and obviously lessening the need for supports. We have these windows, guys, and these schools know better. They just aren't doing it. It's just to save a buck, and it's pathetic, but that's just the reality. Now, I'm not shrugging my shoulders because I'm a defeatist, but I only can help families that come to me, guys. I can't just be pounding the pavement, charging at windmills like Don Quixote, unless I have a purpose or a reason or somebody that this is who I'm representing. It is a systemic problem created because of a good-intentioned program of the first-class preschools. But any well-intentioned state program eventually has its assortment of victims, because that's just how government works. We sit there and go, oh, we're solving this problem. Well, you're solving the problem, but because of your short-sightedness, which government always has, and people that push legislation always have, they don't look at the collateral damage and what else was being supported and what else existed before you shoved this into everybody's face and then provided money for it. Because that's what happened. See, the schools were using their own money, and they were having to do their own preschool programs. As a result of this grandiose first-class preschool government boondoggle, well, the schools said, well, we don't have to do that anymore, do they? But they do. They're just not being held accountable, okay? So we can correct this, but anybody else out there, all right, don't stand for it. If you're in Alabama, that's what the problem is. And if you have a child between 3 and 5 that is not yet kindergarten, stand up, raise your voice, start raising hell, complain. Your child is entitled to far more than what they're giving and what they're offering. And they're required to offer a free, appropriate public education between the preschool years. Offer it and then provide it.